Senator King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hegseth, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Senator.
You've made several references to your religion today. I share that devotion to Christianity, but I must say I've been reminded somewhat of Saul on his way to Damascus. You seem to have been converted over the last several weeks and several months. You wrote in your book just last year that, but if we're going to, this is the book War on Warriors, but if we're going to send our boys to fight, and it should be boys, we need to unleash them to win. Later on, our boys should not fight by rules written by dignified men. Which is it? Is it only boys can fight? I mean, you've testified here today that you believe in women in combat, but you didn't just last year. How do you explain your conversion?
Senator, my testimony is clear. Writing a book is different than being Secretary of Defense, and I look forward to leading the men and women of our military. And my comment there, Senator, was about the burdensome rules of engagement that members of our generation, men and women, have seen on the battlefield. And one thing President Trump changed in meaningful ways that led to meaningful developments on the battlefield. When President Trump took control in the first term, ISIS was raging across Iraq. And as someone who spent a lot of time there with other men and women who invested in that mission, it was a very difficult moment to see the black flag of ISIS fly. And what President Trump did was untie the hands of warfighters. He changed the rules of engagement, untied the hands of warfighters, and allowed them to complete their mission and crush ISIS. It has not just tactical implications, operational and strategic implications, how you allow warfighters to go about winning and fighting their wars. President Trump understands that, and within the laws of war and the Uniform Code of Military Justice, we are going to unleash warfighters to win wars so that wars don't drag on forever, as our generation has seen.
So are you rejecting Title 18 and Title 42, I think, also has provisions that incorporate the Geneva Convention and the laws of armed combat? Are you saying that those laws should be repealed? That is the law of the land right now.
Senator, we have laws on the books from the Geneva Conventions into the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and then underneath that you have layers in which standard or temporary rules of engagement are put into place. We fight enemies also, Senator, as our generation understands, that play by no rules. They use civilians as human shields.
So are you saying
they target
that
women and children?
The Geneva Convention should not be observed?
We follow rules. We follow rules, but we don't need burdensome rules of engagement that make it impossible for us to win these wars.
You're saying two different things. You're saying we follow rules, but we don't have to follow the rules in all cases. Is that correct?
Senator, I'm making an important tactical distinction that warfighters will understand. That there are the rules we swear an oath to defend, which are incredibly important, and this committee understands and helps set them. And then there are those echelons above reality, from corps to division to brigade to battalion, and by the time it trickles down to a company or a platoon or a squad level, you have a rules of engagement that nobody recognizes. And then it makes you incredibly difficult to actually do your job on the battlefield. That's the kind of assessment and look that an Army major will give to this process if I was confirmed to be the Secretary of Defense.
Your quote is
true understanding
of
that.
Your quote in 2024, our boys should not fight by rules written by dignified men in mahogany rooms 80 years ago. That would be the Geneva Convention. America should fight by its own rules, and we should fight to win or not go in at all. Are you saying that the Geneva Convention provisions, which clearly outlaw torture of prisoners, should not apply in the future?
Senator, how we treat our wounded, how we treat our prisoners, the applications of the Geneva Conventions are incredibly important. But we would all have to acknowledge that the way we fought our wars back when the Geneva Conventions were written are a lot different than the asymmetric, non-conventional environment of counterinsurgency that I confronted in Iraq and Afghanistan. I was the senior counterinsurgency instructor in Afghanistan. My job was to understand how the Taliban and al-Qaeda operated so that NATO units coming in could be informed of what was happening. They knew our rules of engagement, and when they were more restrictive, they took advantage of them, and it put our men and women in a more dangerous and difficult place.
And you believe
For future wars we fight, we need to have someone atop the Pentagon, sir, who understands how those ripple effects
Well, I just want to understand your
uniform.
position. Your position is torture's okay. Is that correct? Waterboarding, torture is is no longer prohibited given the circumstances of whatever war we're in. Is that correct?
Senator, that is not what I said. I've never been party to torture. We are a country that fights by the rule of law, and our men and women always do. And yet we have too many people here in air-conditioned offices that like to point fingers at the guys in dark and dangerous places, the gals in helicopters in enemy territory who are doing things that people in Washington, D.C. would never dare to do, or send, in many cases.
In one of your interviews, you said they're willing to do this. You're talking about Donald Trump and Senator Cruz. They're willing to do something like waterboarding if it's going to keep us safe. Are you okay with waterboarding?
Senator, the law of the land is that waterboarding is not legal.
So the statement that you made, you now recant. Is that correct? They are willing to do something like waterboarding if it's going to keep us safe. You expressed that with approval.
Senator, I'm very familiar with that as a concept, having spent a year at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, guarding 700 of those that attacked us on 9/11.
I just want to be clear. Are we going to abide by the Geneva Convention and the prohibitions on torture, or are we not? Is it going to depend on the circumstances?
As I've stated multiple times, the Geneva Conventions are what we base ours. But what an American first national security policy is not going to do is hand its prerogatives over to international bodies that make decisions about how our men and women make decisions on the battlefield. America First understands we send Americans for a clear mission and a clear objective. We equip them properly for that objective. We give them everything they need, and then we stand behind them with the rules of engagement that allow them to fight decisively to defeat America's enemies, which is why we say
I just have a few seconds left,
Mr.
Hegseth, if you could. I was very disturbed in your opening statement where you talked about the priorities that you have. We will work with our partners and allies to deter aggression in the Indo-Pacific from the Communist Chinese. There's not a single mention in this statement about Ukraine or Russia. Is this code for we're going to abandon Ukraine?
Senator, the president, that's a presidential level policy decision. He's made it very clear that he would like to see a end to that conflict. We know who the aggressor is. We know who the good guy is. We'd like to see it as advantageous for the Ukrainians as possible, but that war needs to come to an end.
You talk a lot about deterrence of China. I would submit that Xi Jinping is watching what we do very carefully. If we abandon Ukraine, that would be the strongest signal possible to Xi Jinping that he can take Taiwan without significant resistance from this country.
Thank you, Senator King. Senator Scott of Florida.